You ever look at yourself in the mirror and feel a strange kind of distance? Not because you've aged or changed physically, but because the person looking back feels like a stranger you're not sure you like. We're taught to celebrate survival, to be proud that we made it through the storms. But standing in the quiet of your own bathroom, looking at the weary eyes of the person who endured it all, pride isn't always the first thing that comes to mind. Sometimes it's a heavy, complicated kind of resentment. You see the hardness in the jawline that wasn't there before. You see the way your eyes don't quite light up the way they used to, replaced instead by a gaze that is always calculating, always checking, always braced. It's a haunting realization when you realize you've lost the softness of the person you used to be. You find yourself mourning someone who is still technically alive, but hidden under layers of armor that feel like they've feuered to your skin. This person in the mirror, this survivor, is the one who stayed awake when you wanted to collapse. They are the one who kept a straight face when your heart was breaking. They are the one who learned how to go numb so the pain wouldn't stop you from moving forward. And yet, instead of thanking them, we often feel a deep sense of shame. We look at our reflection and see the messy parts of our history written in the tension of our shoulders. We see the version of ourselves that had to be desperate or angry or cold. We judge that version for not being more graceful, for not being healthier, or for not having it all figured out by now. There's a specific kind of grief in realizing that the cost of your survival was your innocence. You look at yourself and think, I wish I didn't have to be this person. You wish you could reach through the glass and peel back the exhaustion to find the person who was there before the world got heavy. But the truth is, that stranger in the mirror is the only reason you're standing there to begin with. They carried the weight when it was too much for anyone else. They took the hits, they made the hard calls, and they kept your pulse going when everything else felt like it was stopping. We treat this survivor like an intruder in our lives, someone we need to fix or hide away so we can finally be normal. We see their flinching, their hyper-vigilance, and their walls as defects rather than what they truly are. Evidence of a profound, quiet loyalty to staying alive. Connecting with this face requires a different kind of looking. It's moving past the initial recoil and staying in the gaze long enough to see the vulnerability underneath the grit. It's realizing that the distance you feel isn't because you are broken, but because you've been living in a foxhole for so long that you've forgotten how to live in a home. The face you don't recognize is just a person who is tired of being strong. They aren't looking for your judgment. They are looking for a place to finally put the bags down. When you look at that reflection, try to see the child who was forced to become a soldier. Try to see the teenager who had to become their own parent. Try to see the adult who had to build a fortress out of nothing. That stranger isn't someone to be ashamed of. They are the most courageous version of you, even if they are the hardest one to look at right now. Learning to love them isn't about liking the trauma that made them. It's about honoring the resilience that kept them and you whole. We call it survival, but in the moment, it just felt like keeping your head above water. Maybe it looked like becoming incredibly quiet so you wouldn't be noticed. Or perhaps it looked like becoming the loudest, most accomplished person in the room, so you'd finally feel safe. These weren't choices made out of a sense of adventure. They were reactions. When the world feels unpredictable, your internal system builds a suit of armor. The problem is, once the sun comes out, we often find ourselves still wearing that heavy metal, wondering why we can't just feel the breeze. It's helpful to think about the sheer effort that goes into staying whole when things are falling apart. It's like trying to hold a shattered vase together with nothing but your bare hands, while the wind is screaming around you. You can't let go for a second, or the pieces will scatter. So, you tighten your grip. You stop breathing deeply because you're afraid any sudden movement will break the seal. Your mind learns to work overtime, calculating every possible disaster before it happens, trying to outrun a pain that hasn't even arrived yet. This is the mechanics of your survival. It's a sophisticated, tireless engine running in the background of your life, consuming all your fuel just to keep the lights on. Think of the habits you've formed that you now find frustrating. Maybe you're the person who is always checking their phone, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or maybe you're the one who cleans the entire house when you're stressed, because control over your environment is the only thing that makes the world feel steady. We often look at these behaviors and call them anxiety or obsessions, but they started as brilliant solutions. Your system wasn't trying to make your life difficult. It was trying to give you a sense of agency when you had none. It was building a dam to hold back a flood. The weight of this armor is immense. When you've spent years braced for impact, your muscles forget how to go soft. Your heart forgets how to open without checking the perimeter first. You might find yourself in a perfectly safe situation, sitting on a couch with someone who loves you, or walking through a quiet park. And yet, your body is still reacting as if there's a threat. You feel a tightness in your chest or a knot in your stomach, and you get angry at yourself. Why can't I just relax? You ask. But you have to realize that your mechanics don't have a calendar. They don't know that the crisis ended 5 years ago. They are still standing guard at the gates, waiting for an enemy that left a long time ago. Staying whole often meant sacrificing the parts of yourself that felt too much. You might have tucked away your creativity, your spontaneity, or your deep sensitivity, because those things felt like liabilities in a crisis. You became a version of yourself that was streamlined for endurance. You became efficient. You became practical. You became whatever you needed to be to make it to the next morning. And while that efficiency saved you, it also left you feeling hollowed out. To love the survivor is to acknowledge the incredible craftsmanship of that armor. It was forged in fire. It was built with your own sweat and tears. It served a beautiful, tragic purpose. But healing is the slow process of realizing that you are no longer in the furnace. You don't have to keep holding the pieces of the vase together with your bare hands anymore. you can start to use glue. You can start to trust that the ground isn't going to open up beneath you. It's okay to acknowledge how exhausting it has been to be your own architect, your own soldier, and your own shield. You did what you had to do to stay whole, and there is a profound, quiet dignity in that struggle. Now, the work is learning how to be whole without having to be so heavy. It's difficult to love the version of yourself that had to be tough. When we look at our survivor self, we see the rough edges. We see the parts of us that are quick to anger, the parts that shut down when someone gets too close, or the parts that obsessively overthink every text message. We judge these traits as flaws. We wish we could just be normal or easygoing. We forget that these traits were once the very things that kept us from breaking. As Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But before we can choose who to become, we have to acknowledge who we had to be. We recoil from these internal scars because they remind us of the time we weren't safe. Every time you catch yourself being too defensive or pulling away from a kind gesture, it feels like a stain on your character. You look at those reactions and feel a sense of secondary shame. Shame not for what happened to you, but for how you changed because of it. You might look at people who seem light, who laugh easily, and trust without a second thought, and you feel a sharp pang of envy. You see your own scars as jagged, ugly things that make you difficult to love. You feel like you're carrying a heavy, invisible baggage that everyone can see, even when you're doing your best to hide it. But why do we look at a physical scar with a sense of wonder, at the body's ability to knit itself back together, yet look at a psychological scar with such disgust? A scar is simply proof that the wound was deeper than the skin, but the will to live was deeper than the wound. When you find yourself reacting with that old toughness, you aren't being a bad person. We recoil because we mistake the protection for the person. We think we are the anger. We think we are the coldness. We think we are the hyper-independence. It takes a massive amount of courage to stop looking at those scars as evidence of your brokenness and start seeing them as evidence of your endurance. We often try to fix ourselves by attempting to sand down those rough edges until we're smooth again. We want to erase the history written in our nervous systems. But those edges are where you held yourself together when the world tried to pull you apart. They are the marks of a fighter who didn't have a choice but to win. When you feel that impulse to turn away from your reflection, to hide the parts of you that feel tired, try to remember that those parts were your most loyal allies. They were the ones who stayed in the trenches with you. To recoil from them is to abandon the only part of you that knew how to survive the unthinkable. We have to stop apologizing for the ways we had to change to stay alive. We have to stop wishing we were the person we were before the world taught us why we needed to be strong. Healing isn't about getting back to a pure or unscarred version of yourself. That person doesn't exist anymore, and that's okay. The person who exists now is much more complex much deeper, and has a capacity for empathy that a smooth person might never understand. When you stop recoiling from the scars, you start to see the story they tell, a story of incredible loyalty to your own life. You begin to see that those rough edges aren't there to keep people out. They were built to keep you in, to keep your soul from leaking out when things got dark. Loving the survivor means reaching out and touching those scars with kindness, acknowledging that while they may be reminders of pain, they are also the very things that prove you are still here, still breathing, and still capable of becoming something whole again. Think about the way you scan a room when you walk in. You notice the exits, the tone of someone's voice, the slight shift in the atmosphere. To the rest of the world, you might just seem observant, or maybe a bit intense. But to you, it's a constant, exhausting background noise. It's hard to love that internal alarm system when all you want is to just sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee without wondering if the person at the next table is judging you. You feel like a radio that's stuck on a high-frequency static, and you blame the radio for not playing music. Hyper-vigilance is a heavy cloak that you never quite learn how to take off. It's the invisible labor of being your own bodyguard, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It means that even when you are physically safe, your mind is still out on the perimeter, patrolling the fences. You find yourself analyzing the micro-expressions on a friend's face, wondering if that half-second of silence meant they were angry at you. You hear a loud noise in the street, and your heart doesn't just flutter. It hammers against your ribs like it's trying to escape. You aren't dramatic, and you aren't crazy. You are simply a person whose internal security team is still working a double shift years after the threat has passed. The real burden is how lonely this makes you feel. While everyone else seems to be relaxing into the moment, you are stuck in the what if. You feel a sense of guilt for not being able to just be present, a phrase that feels like an insult when your brain is hardwired to look for danger. You look at your survivor self, the one who can't stop checking the door locks, or the one who rehearses every conversation before it happens. And you feel a deep, burning frustration. You want to tell that part of you to shut up, to go away, to let you be happy. You see it as a wall between you and the world, a barrier that prevents you from ever truly feeling the warmth of another person. But if we look closer, we see that hypervigilance is actually a profound act of love from your younger self. At some point in your life, being observant was the only thing that kept you safe. Knowing when the mood in the house shifted was the only way you knew how to protect yourself. Detecting the subtle change in a parent's or a partner's voice was your early warning system. Your brain learned that details matter, that noticing the small things was the difference between being okay and being hurt. It's an incredible, sharp intelligence that developed under pressure. The weight of this constant scanning is what leads to that bone-deep exhaustion that sleep can't fix. It's a cognitive tax you pay on every single interaction. When you're hypervigilant, You're not just living your life, you're managing a crisis that isn't happening. It's hard to love the survivor in the mirror when they look so tired, when their eyes look like they haven't seen a peaceful night in a decade. You see the circles under your eyes and the tension in your forehead, and you think, I'm so broken. But what if you looked at that tension and saw a sentry who has been standing at their post for 20 years without a break? What if, instead of being angry at the static on the radio, you acknowledged that the radio was built to pick up signals in the dark? Loving this part of yourself means starting to talk to your nervous system with the tenderness you'd give a frightened child. It's saying, I see you looking for the exits. I see you checking the tones of voice. Thank you for trying so hard to keep me safe. But we're okay right now. You can take a breath. It's a long road to convincing your body that the war is over. It's not about fixing your brain so you never notice the exits again. It's about reaching a place where you can notice the exit and then choose to look back at the person across the table. It's about honoring the burden of your vigilance while slowly, gently beginning to unbuckle the armor. Your survivor self isn't trying to ruin your life with fear. They are just a very loyal, very tired guard who hasn't been told they're allowed to come inside and sit by the fire yet. We often get frustrated with ourselves for overreacting to small things. A slight delay in a response or a certain look from a colleague sends us into a tailspin. We tell ourselves we're being dramatic. But that's the survivor in you doing its job. It's using an old map to navigate a new city. That part of you doesn't know that the environment has changed. It only knows that a certain tone of voice used to mean trouble. It's hard to be patient with a version of yourself that is constantly bracing for a hit that isn't coming anymore. Think of these protections as ghosts, shadows of defenses that were once very real and very necessary. Imagine you lived in a place where it rained every single day for years. You would never leave the house without a heavy raincoat and a sturdy umbrella. It would become second nature. Then you move to a desert where the sun is always shining. Yet, every morning, you still find yourself reaching for that heavy coat. You feel silly, you feel overheated, and you're frustrated that you can't just walk out the door in a t-shirt like everyone else. But your body remembers the rain. It remembers the chill. These ghosts are just your memory's way of trying to make sure you never get soaked to the bone again. When we experience a trigger, it's often just one of these ghosts stepping into the room. Maybe it's a specific smell, a way someone clears their throat, or the way a room goes quiet. Suddenly, you aren't an adult in a safe office or a peaceful home. You are the version of yourself that first needed that protection. Your heart rate spikes, your throat tightens, and you might lash out or shut down. In the aftermath, you feel a wave of self-loathing. You think, why can't I just be normal? Why am I so reactive? You look in the mirror and see someone who feels unstable. But what if you looked at that reaction as a testament to your loyalty to yourself? These ghosts are the echoes of a time when you were your only advocate. They are the remnants of a survival strategy that worked. If you hadn't been quick to react back then, if you hadn't learned to read the air, things might have been much worse. The ghost isn't there to haunt you. It's there because it hasn't realized its job is finished. It's a part of your psyche that is stuck in a loop, repeating the same defensive drill because it loves you too much to let you be caught off guard. To love the survivor in the mirror is to look at your own reflection during a moment of panic and say, I see why you're doing this. I remember when this specific feeling meant we were in trouble. But look around. The walls are solid. The person in front of us is kind. We aren't in that house anymore. It's an emotional remapping that takes time and an incredible amount of gentleness. You have to teach the survivor in you that different doesn't always mean dangerous. You have to show that part of yourself that it's okay to put the umbrella down, even if the clouds look a little gray. The frustration we feel toward our overreactions is often just a lack of compassion for the child or the younger version of us who was never allowed to feel safe. When you look at your survivor self, try not to see a person who is too much or broken. See someone who is carrying the ghosts of old battles so you don't have to. Healing is the process of letting these ghosts rest. It's telling them, thank you for the protection. You did a great job, but you can stop standing guard now. Every time you respond to a trigger with kindness instead of judgment, you are telling the person in the mirror that they are allowed to inhabit the present, even with all their history. You are acknowledging that the map you're holding might be old and wrinkled, but the person carrying it has done a magnificent job of finding the way home. There is a specific kind of loneliness in being the person who has it all together. You've spent years perfecting the art of self-reliance because at some point you learned that you had to be your own safety net. Now, even when people offer help, you find yourself pushing it away. You feel a sense of guilt for needing anything at all. You look at that hyper-independent person in the mirror and feel frustrated that you can't just let go. You've become a master of the I'm fine mask, and now you feel trapped behind it. This exhaustion isn't just a physical tiredness. It's a soul weariness that comes from holding the weight of a world you were never meant to carry alone. When you are the strong one, you become the pillar that everyone else leans on, but you rarely find a wall solid enough to lean on yourself. You've learned to anticipate everyone else's needs, to smooth over the cracks in every relationship, and to keep your own voice steady, even when your hands are shaking under the table. You do it so well that people have stopped asking if you're okay, because they've bought into the myth of your invulnerability. And the hardest part is that you've started to believe it too, or at least you feel like you aren't allowed to be anything else. You look in the mirror and see a person who is incredibly reliable, but also incredibly empty. You see the person who always says yes, the person who fixes the problems, the person who stays calm in the crisis. But you also see the person who goes to bed feeling like they've been holding their breath for a decade. You feel a strange resentment toward your own strength. You wish you could be messy. You wish you could be the one who falls apart and gets picked up. But there is a terrifying voice in your head that whispers, if you stop being strong, everything will collapse. You feel like your value is tied entirely to your utility, to what you can do for others, rather than who you are. This hyper-independence is a survival mechanism that was born from necessity. Maybe there was a time when the people who were supposed to catch you weren't there, or maybe they were the ones causing the fall. In those moments, being strong wasn't a personality trait. It was a life raft. You learned that the only hands you could truly trust were the ones at the ends of your own arms. But now, that life raft has become a prison. You find yourself unable to receive love because receiving feels like a debt you can't pay, or a vulnerability you can't afford. You treat your own needs like inconveniences, tucking them away in a dark corner so they don't get in the way of your performance of strength. The burden of being the strong one is the constant vigilance of maintaining the image. You can't let the mask slip because you don't know who you are without it. You worry that if people saw the survivor underneath, the one who is actually scared or tired or just plain lonely, they would turn away. So you keep building the walls higher. You keep saying, I've got it, even when your back is at the breaking point. You look at your reflection and see a hero, but you feel like a fraud. You are tired of being the anchor in everyone else's storm while you're quietly drowning in your own. Loving the survivor in this context means giving yourself permission to be weak. It's realizing that your strength was a gift you gave yourself to survive, but it doesn't have to be the only thing you are. It's looking at that person in the mirror and saying, you've done enough. You don't have to carry this today. It's the terrifying, brave act of letting someone see the cracks. It's acknowledging that needing help isn't a failure of your character. It's an admission of your humanity. To heal, you have to start dismantling the idea that your worth is measured by how much you can endure. You have to learn that the person in the mirror deserves to be cared for, not just for what they provide, but simply because they exist. It's okay to be the one who is held. It's okay to let the I'm fine mask drop and say, I'm actually really tired. The survivor in you isn't just a machine built for endurance. They are a person who deserves rest. And the most strong thing you can do is finally allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to be loved for more than just your strength. We spend so much energy trying to prune away the damaged parts of ourselves, hoping that if we cut enough off, we'll finally be lovable. But those parts aren't weeds. They are roots. Jung noted that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If we keep pushing away the survivor, the one who is scared, the one who is angry, the one who is tired, they don't disappear. They just operate from the basement of our minds. Healing isn't about getting rid of that version of you. It's about bringing them upstairs and giving them a seat at the table. Think of all the things about yourself that you've tried to hide in the dark. Maybe it's a deep-seated anger that flares up when you feel ignored, or a coldness that takes over when you feel vulnerable. Perhaps it's a desperate need for validation that you find embarrassing, or a habit of pushing people away before they can leave you. We call these our shadows. We think of them as the villains of our internal story, the parts of us that keep us from being good or healthy. We spend our lives trying to outrun them, locking the door and pretending they don't exist. But the shadow isn't a monster. It's a collection of orphans, parts of you that were rejected because they weren't useful or safe during the time you were just trying to survive. The survivor in you often lives in this shadow. This is the version of you that had to be aggressive to stay safe, or the version that had to lie to avoid trouble, or the version that became completely detached to survive a loss. Because these traits don't fit into the nice or healed version of yourself you're trying to present to the world, you treat them like shameful secrets. You look in the mirror and only want to see the person who has moved on. But those hidden parts are still there, and they are exhausted from being ignored. When you don't acknowledge the shadow, it finds a way to speak for itself, usually through a sudden outburst, a physical symptom, or a pattern of self-sabotage that you can't seem to break. Integrating the shadow means looking at those shameful traits and asking them what they were trying to do for you. When that coldness rises up, instead of hating yourself for being unfeeling, try to see it as a shield that was once necessary to protect a heart that was being overwhelmed. When the anger bubbles over, see it as the part of you that finally decided you deserved to be treated better, even if it doesn't know how to say it calmly yet. These parts of you aren't trying to ruin your life. They are just survival tools that have been left in the dark for too long. They are crude and unrefined because they haven't been allowed to grow in the light of your compassion. There is a profound relief in finally stopping the war with yourself. It's the moment you realize that you don't have to be perfect to be whole. Being whole means owning the fact that you have been broken, you have been angry, and you have been scared. It means taking the hand of that terrified version of yourself and saying, "I see you. I'm not going to leave you in the dark anymore." This isn't about giving those parts of you permission to run the show. It's about giving them permission to exist. When you bring the survivor out of the basement, they stop having to scream to be heard. Jung's idea of individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are. And you cannot be who you are if you are missing half of your pieces. You are not just the person who survived. You are the person who felt the pain, the person who was angry about it, and the person who is now trying to make sense of it all. You are the light and the shadow together. When you look in the mirror, try to see the beauty in the complexity. See the person who has faced their own darkness and decided to keep going. Integrating the shadow is the bravest thing you will ever do, because it requires you to love the parts of yourself that you were taught were unlovable. It's the moment the stranger in the mirror finally starts to look like family. Imagine a friend came to you and told you they'd been through exactly what you've been through. Imagine they showed you their defensive habits, their sudden bursts of anxiety, and their need to pull away when things get too quiet. You wouldn't tell them they were too much or broken. You wouldn't roll your eyes at their fear or tell them to just get over it. You would probably hold their hand, look them in the eye, and tell them it makes perfect sense why they feel that way. You would see their struggle as a badge of courage. So why is it that when we look at our own reflection, we lose that bridge of empathy? We treat our history like a list of crimes we committed, rather than a series of challenges we navigated. This compassion gap is one of the quietest tragedies of healing. It's the double standard we hold against ourselves, where we offer the world a soft heart, but keep a handful of stones for our own reflection. We are often our own most brutal investigators, cross-examining every reaction and criticizing every stumble. We expect ourselves to have healed on a linear timeline, as if growth were a project with a deadline. When we feel that old survival instinct flare up, the urge to hide, the impulse to over-explain, the need to be perfect, we treat it as a personal failure. We see a lack of progress where we should be seeing a nervous system that is simply trying its best to keep us safe in a world that wasn't always kind. Think about the sheer amount of energy it takes to maintain this gap. It's exhausting to be both the person struggling and the person judging the struggle. You are constantly monitoring yourself for symptoms of your past, as if your history were a disease you need to eradicate. You look at the survivor in the mirror, and you see someone who is difficult or clunky. You see the way you struggle to trust, and you call yourself cold. You see the way you need reassurance, and you call yourself needy. You strip away the context of why those traits exist, leaving only the judgment. You forget that a person who has walked through fire is allowed to be sensitive to the heat. Closing this gap starts with a radical, simple question. What if I treated myself like someone I actually liked? It sounds almost silly, but for a survivor, it's one of the most difficult shifts to make. It means looking at your flaws and seeing them as adaptations. It means acknowledging that your hyper-vigilance isn't a personality defect. It's a bodyguard that hasn't been given a day off. It means realizing that your need for control isn't because you're a control freak, but because there was a time when things were so out of control that your safety depended on your ability to manage the chaos. We often think that being hard on ourselves is what keeps us moving forward, that if we stop the self-criticism, we'll stop growing. But the opposite is true. Shame is a frozen state. It keeps us stuck in the very patterns we're trying to change. Compassion is what creates the warmth necessary for things to actually shift. When you look in the mirror, try to see the survivor, not as a project to be fixed, but as a person who has earned the right to be understood. You don't have to be all better to deserve your own kindness. The next time you catch yourself in that gap, judging your own reactions, feeling ashamed of your pace, take a breath and try to bridge the distance. Imagine that younger version of you standing right there. Would you speak to them the way you're speaking to yourself now? Would you tell them they're a burden for being scared? Of course not. You'd tell them they did a great job getting through a hard time. Loving the survivor in the mirror means finally extending that same grace to the adult who carried them here. It's recognizing that you are not a series of mistakes or a collection of traumas. You are the person who made it, and that alone makes you worthy of every ounce of compassion you so freely give to everyone else. Loving the survivor in the mirror starts with a shift in vocabulary. Instead of saying, "Why am I so anxious?" try saying, "My system is trying to protect me right now." Instead of, "I'm so closed off," try, "I am learning how to trust again." It's a slow, clunky process. It feels fake at first, but you are essentially reparenting the version of you that had to grow up too fast or deal with too much. You're telling that person, you don't have to fight anymore. You did a great job, but you can rest now. We don't often realize how violent our internal language can be. We use words like broken, damaged, or messed up to describe our very survival. We talk about our reactions as if they are glitches in a machine, rather than the heartbeat of someone who has endured. When you call yourself weak for having an emotional day, you are essentially telling the survivor in you that their exhaustion doesn't matter. But when you start to learn this new language, you begin to see that there is no such thing as a wrong feeling. There are only feelings that make sense given what you've been through. You start to replace the language of self-correction with the language of self-connection. Think about how different it feels to say, "I'm having a hard time," versus, "I am a hard person." One is a temporary state of being that deserves comfort. The other is a permanent sentence that invites shame. This new language is about moving from "what is wrong with me" to "what happened to me, and how can I support myself through it?" It's a transition from being a harsh warden to being a gentle witness. You start to notice the way you talk to yourself in the shower, or while you're driving, or in those quiet moments before you fall asleep. You realize that you have been speaking to yourself in a way you would never speak to a stranger. And you decide, one word at a time, to change the tone. This isn't just about positive thinking or empty affirmations. It's about truth. It is a biological truth that your brain changed to help you stay alive. It is a historical truth that you faced things that were too big for you. So when you use language that acknowledges that truth, it resonates deep within your bones. When you tell yourself, "It's okay that I'm overwhelmed right now. I've carried a lot today," your nervous system actually begins to settle. It hears that it is no longer under attack from the inside. You are finally on your own side. Learning this language is like learning to speak in a new country. You're going to stumble. You're going to forget the words and slip back into the old, sharp insults because they are familiar. But every time you catch yourself and choose a gentler word, you are building a bridge back to your own heart. You are teaching the person in the mirror that they are safe with you. You are creating a space where the survivor doesn't have to perform or be perfect just to be accepted. You are saying, "I am not a problem to be solved. I am a person to be held." As you practice this, you'll notice that the reflection in the mirror starts to change. The eyes don't look quite as haunted when they aren't being judged by the person they belong to. The jaw loosens just a little bit. You start to see that the survivor isn't a separate, shameful entity you have to drag through life. They are you, the part of you that was brave enough to stay. And as you give them better words, kinder words, and more honest words, you give them the permission they've been waiting for. The permission to stop surviving and finally start living. It's a slow conversation, but it's the most important one you'll ever have. It's the language of coming home to yourself. Self-discovery isn't always a mountaintop moment of clarity. Most of the time, it's the quiet, grainy work of looking in the mirror and not turning away. It's seeing the scars, the defenses, and the weary eyes, and saying, I see why you did what you had to do. You don't have to love every habit or every reaction immediately. You just have to start by accepting that the survivor isn't your enemy. They're the reason you're still here to ask these questions. You are a work in progress, and the person in the mirror is the most loyal companion you've ever had. It's time to start treating them like one. We often think of bravery as a loud, explosive thing, a grand gesture, or a sudden leap of faith. But for those of us who have spent years just trying to keep the lights on inside, bravery is much quieter. It's the decision to wake up and try again when everything in you wants to withdraw. It's the choice to stay present in your own body when it feels safer to float away. There is a profound, heroic courage in simply refusing to abandon yourself, even when you feel like a stranger to your own soul. Staying is an active choice. It's a commitment to the person you are becoming, even before you can see the full picture. Think about the times you wanted to quit, not just on a task, but on the whole idea of healing. The times when the weight of your history felt so heavy that you weren't sure you could take another step. In those moments, the survivor in you was the one who kept your feet moving. They didn't need a map or a reason. They just had a stubborn, beautiful instinct to keep going. When you look in the mirror, you aren't just looking at someone who endured. You're looking at someone who chose to stay in the fight. That choice deserves your respect. It deserves a moment of silence where you acknowledge that you are still here, and that being here is enough. We spend so much time looking for an exit from our pain, waiting for the day we can finally say we are over it. But the real victory isn't in leaving your past behind. It's in staying with yourself through the mess of it. It's the bravery of sitting in the discomfort of a trigger and not hating yourself for it. It's the bravery of feeling a boundary being crossed and, for the first time, choosing to speak up instead of staying small. These aren't just moments of improvement. They are radical acts of self-reclamation. You are taking back the territory that was taken from you, one quiet breath at a time. There is a unique beauty in a person who has decided to stay with themselves. It's a beauty that doesn't rely on being unbroken. It's the beauty of a mended heart that knows exactly where the cracks are and isn't afraid to let the light shine through them. When you look at the face you didn't recognize in section 1, and you realize it's the same face you're learning to speak to in Section 9. The distance starts to close. You begin to see that the survivor and the you are not two different people. You are a single, complex, magnificent whole. The quiet bravery of staying means you stop waiting for someone else to come and rescue you. You realize that the rescue already happened. It happened every time you chose to survive. It happened every time you protected your inner child. Every time you held your own hand in the dark. And every time you decided to keep looking in that mirror. You are your own sanctuary. You are your own proof that change is possible. So take a long, honest look at that person in the reflection. Notice the strength in their stillness. Notice the resilience in their gaze. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be healed by tomorrow morning. You just have to stay. You just have to keep showing up for the person who showed up for you when things were at their worst. That is the ultimate act of love. That is the quiet bravery that changes everything. You have stayed through the storm, and now you get to stay for the sunrise. If this helped you see the person in the mirror a little more clearly today, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which part of your survivor self has been the hardest for you to be kind to? Or is there a specific ghost of protection that you're finally starting to recognize in your own life? Thanks for being here.